Hello again and welcome to The Luxury of Choice, a B2B sales and business podcast brought to you by the training team of George James Limited. My name is Steve Vaughan. I'm the host and producer of this podcast, and I'm also a member of the training team. And I'm here again once more with two of my colleagues. Today we've got Jayne Green and Christian Walter. Jayne, how are you? How are things?
Yeah, very well. Thank you, Steve. It's been a while since the podcast, so good to be
We've all
here.
missed you. Yeah, it's not been the same without you.
Well, I'm not sure about that, but you know.
Great to have you here. Yeah, great to hear. And Christian, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you very much. I had a very busy week. I was training a foundational selling skills course on Wednesday, and that was always a highlight. Lots of eager
As for
young-
you, Jayne, of course, as well, yeah.
Yes, 2 days of that also for me, which have been brilliant.
Yeah, great stuff. Sales management and leadership for me this week. So it's starting to get that sort of end of year rush of lots of things happening, isn't it? It's always my favourite time of year, this is. Not just because of we're busy, but there's always lots happening, lots going on, isn't there? Apart from the weather getting a bit lousy, well, that's a consequence of living in the Northern Hemisphere, but still, that's what it is. So without me wittering on any more, let's get on to today's topic. And that's a slightly different one for us today. And I think it's a really interesting one. I'm going to be really interested to hear what you think about this, you two. So the topic is the dangers of the corridor conversation. It sounds like a thriller or an Agatha Christie movie or something like that, but not. It's something we need to be aware of as technical salespeople. So I think to start with, we probably need to define what is a corridor conversation. So let's start with you, Jayne. So what do we mean, do you think, by a corridor conversation?
Well, I think we can think about it in several ways, but just from the line that you've given us, it's that conversation that we can so easily fall into. We may have met the customer in their reception or at a meeting point, and we're strolling along down the corridor with them to get to the lab or their office or some place to have a discussion. And we end up sometimes diving in very quickly, all about what we talk about and how we start that conversation off as we're walking. And I think it's really important to discuss.
And I guess on some sites, some of the big sort of pharmaceutical type sites or those kind of things, the walk from the reception to the lab or to the plant or wherever we're going can be 10 minutes, something like that, really. It can be quite a walk, can't it, really?
Easily, yes.
Yeah, interesting. And I guess, of course, we've got to go back on the way out as well. So, Christian, anything different thoughts from you as to what we mean by corridor conversation?
Yeah, I think it's slightly wider than just the walk to and from the lab or to and from the meeting room. It's also, maybe an opportunity at an exhibition to have an off-the-record conversation with your contact, with your customer.
Okay. Yeah, I thought of that, yeah.
Before official discussions start or after official discussions have finished.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, it's also an opportunity because it often is easier to get the real information from the customer off the records or outside the meeting room.
Yeah. Okay. So are we saying then that even though we haven't officially started the sales meeting or sales visit, we still need to be professional and fired up and ready to start thinking about what the customer's saying to us right from the get-go? Is that what we're saying?
Absolutely. I think we often talk about our first impression, and it's the first impression a customer may have if we've not met them directly before. So we're building up that quick rapport. We're trying to get to know that customer, quite quickly, maybe in some of these instances. And these conversations before we get into the official meeting, I think are really important to be very strategic and thinking about what we talk about, what we don't, and our curiosity in those moments can peak to, its greatest.
Right. So I guess, I'm the customer. I've just come down from my lab, shall we say, and I've walked through the corridors and I'm now in reception. And, nice to meet you, Jayne. Nice to meet you, Christian. We're heading back towards the lab. What kind of things are appropriate for us to be talking about and what kind of things aren't appropriate? What do we think?
I think in these moments, I would keep it general at the beginning, maybe ask about how business is going, how the staff is doing, whether they're busy or whether there is not a lot of work, these kind of more general topics.
Yeah.
To bring the person at ease a little bit, and also signal your interest.
Yeah.
And, maybe you walk by a production plant and you could ask, hey, what is it you're doing there? Or what's the point of these storage silos? Or so just show your interest, but don't go into the selling, into the qualifying yet. I think.
So what's your budget? What's the timescale? What's the application?
Yeah.
And are you the personal
I don't
authority?
think that would be appropriate.
Hopefully not, no. And some of the things I can think of that I've done in the time that I've seen people do as well is, if we've had a difficult drive to get there, my drive up the M6 has been murdered today and you wouldn't believe what the traffic's like. And it took me half an hour to park anywhere. We're laughing, but I've heard people do that. I've probably done it myself, to be honest.
Yeah, and the customer's thinking, I don't actually care.
No, exactly.
And also maybe thinking, I do that journey every day, 5 days a week.
That's a good point. Yeah, welcome to my world.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's that bit we can sometimes moan about things in that moment, can't we?
Yeah.
If we're kind of not ready and prepared. And for me, it all comes down to how we've prepared before, even before we've even got in our car.
Yeah.
For the whole meeting, hopefully the day before or a few days before. But, I think that orchestrating, but also being real in those moments. This is a chance for us to be, we're not in the deep meeting that could be, getting really understanding the negotiation or the proposal, or even fully qualifying, what it's all about. We've got a real opportunity to walk alongside another human being that, lives and breathes and eats as well. So we'd hope. So we can have a meaningful conversation that helps us to get to know them a little bit more. Let's understand who we are going to be sitting in front of.
Be a real human being.
Yeah, for maybe whatever we've planned, a 45-minute meeting, we've got some opportunity now to see who this real person is.
I think that's a super point,
to pick up, how they work, how they communicate. Do they like small talk? Do they not? It just helps me gauge a little bit about what that meeting might be looking like, when we get to the place.
Love it. Yeah. Yeah.
I think another opportunity really at the beginning, as you walk towards the lab or the meeting room, is to establish a connection.
Yes.
Establish credibility. And of course, if you have some joint acquaintances, I think it's maybe an opportunity to talk about them, or if you've been to the same university. So this all helps us to build a rapport with the stranger, which otherwise we might not get so quickly. And I think that's an opportunity in this before the meeting starts, because it's time that is considered okay to talk about such topics, whereas in the actual meeting, maybe the customer expects you to be more business-like.
Sure. And so I guess we're sort of saying like, oh, does Dave Smith still work here? I used to go to university with Dave Smith. We used to play football with him and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Just, I need to just reach up and plug my camera. I just realised I haven't plugged it in, so it's going to die in a second. So I'm going to ask you a question while I reach in front of the camera. But just from a sort of modern world perspective, talking about cameras actually, whilst we, of course, always want to make our sales calls face-to-face, sometimes, of course, we're having to do them virtually and for various reasons. So how does this translate to the virtual world? If we're making a call over Zoom or Teams, we don't have a corridor conversation, but we still do, I guess, have to be real human beings. What are our thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, and if you know that there's more than one person likely to be in that meeting, sometimes we have that waiting period, don't we? Where you're waiting for somebody else to join. It's that moment of not making that awkward. If you're on a meeting with a couple of other people, we've got that opportunity to do the same thing. What's of interest. I also quite like to find out, what's interesting to them. What have they done? Is there anything new? Particularly if I've picked up something, from looking at LinkedIn, I've seen that they've got a big, marathon trophy or sort of like badge around their neck. I like to find out about things like that. And again, we can do the same, in that very beginning, the start of that meeting while we're waiting for everybody to get settled.
I remember when we were in the deep of the COVID period, which 5 years ago now, incredibly, and running a training course for a company, and the people assembled virtually, and one of the sales guys, I think, was from Denmark, and people weren't using virtual backgrounds quite so much at the moment, which I do want to come back to. But when he came on, he'd got a load of vinyl records behind him. And of course, I'm a music geek, as you guys know. And I immediately said, what kind of music are you into? And we had a chance to have a bit of a real human interaction for 30 seconds before we started the training. So it's one of the reasons why I don't like virtual backgrounds, for that reason, actually, because it gives people a reason to have a conversation behind you. So, okay, so let's take it back into the real world. Again, just something that popped into my head while we were talking, like your thoughts on this, Christian. When we're in reception waiting for the customer, do we sit down or do we stand up, or does it matter?
I always stand up.
Okay.
I always look at the posters on the walls. I study the KPIs that are sometimes there. I look at company brochures, perhaps, that are lying on the coffee table. So it's a chance to familiarize yourself with the company, with what they're doing, with the culture. Maybe you can get a feeling if there are all these signs about do's and don'ts, maybe you realize, it's quite a strict company. If there's a lot of corporate branding, then you understand, it's a very corporate environment, I think it gives you a chance to learn more. And I think standing up it gives a more active impression.
Do you agree, Jayne?
Totally, yes. I really hate sitting down waiting anyway. But yeah, you're ready. You're ready for the customer. You're anticipating the customer coming. And it's just so much smoother, isn't it, to be able to greet somebody when you're standing up, when they're suddenly standing up and you realise that you're sitting down and they're looming over you. Yeah. It's not a great place to start.
Yeah.
But you do pick up the culture, right from in the reception normally of an institute or of a company that you go into.
I can remember sitting and waiting for customers, sitting in those days, before I knew any better, and not knowing who the customer was. And somebody will come to reception and you stand up and put your hand out and it's not the right person. That's slightly awkward. Oh, you're not there. Well, okay. So I guess another reason why we're standing up. So another thought, I think we've touched on this one before, but let's just, explore it again. So pros and cons of meeting the customer in their lab or their factory as opposed to in, say, a coffee area or a restaurant. What are our thoughts there? Either of you?
I'm a great proponent to go to the lab or go to the process environment because you can learn so much there from just looking around. This will also trigger some good questions for discussions you can have with your customer. You can see how many people there are, are they young, are they old, are they using gloves, are they not, are they operating computers, are they writing stuff down manually. We can learn so much that is going to be relevant for our sales discussion.
Okay.
But also, I think the other advantage of having the sales discussion in the lab is it is a less formal setting than if you're sat at a conference table.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And I believe sometimes people give away more information or are more relaxed when you're standing in front of a chemical bench and you're talking rather than looking each other in the eye, particularly and that's often the case in our industry, that the scientists are quite often introverted people and they don't feel comfortable in this formal meeting situations. And it's sometimes easier to find out good information when you're standing in the lab.
You had a slightly different view on this when we were talking beforehand, Jayne, or you added some additional info, shall we say? Do you want to share that?
I mean, I do agree with Christian. I'm an advocate of getting into the lab and seeing what's going on. There's nothing like that because you see for real, what it is and what's happening. However, I've recently been training people that have said a lot of their meetings are now in coffee shops, or they actually give people the choice and they go out to a coffee shop. And I was initially thinking, I'm not sure, you can't see what's going on. But their point was, it's a really valid point, actually. You take somebody out of their normal environment, so you're on very equal territory, which is actually also quite a nice thought. It's giving them a bit of a breakout from that moment within their own company, so they can start thinking in a slightly different or clearer, or maybe even a broader perspective, taking them outside of their environment, and particularly if you're buying the coffee. It would work with me. But yes, it's just another thought, actually, that I think there are some times when that's really valid for some customers to take them outside their environment. But that also, I then would really want to go back with them and go, I'd love to have a look around.
Be nosy, yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a really interesting perspective. I hadn't thought about that. I guess there's a couple of caveats there. Obviously, the location has to be appropriate.
Yes, of course.
And in some organisations, you wouldn't be allowed to buy the coffee, I think. Because
True.
the workflows and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think it's a really interesting perspective. So back to the dangers of the corridor. Oh, sorry, Christian, go on.
Let me quickly add a thought here, Steve.
Sure, yeah.
So I believe if we can get the customer into a restaurant, be it a coffee shop or for lunch, and depending on the culture, it's not in Western Europe, we don't take customers for dinner, but in Asia, they do it all the time.
Yeah.
Correct.
And I think the aim is always the same, to bring the customer out of their stressful environment.
Yeah.
Where there are lots of do's and don'ts and lots of norms. In the coffee shop, in the restaurant, these rules don't exist so much.
Yeah.
It's an opportunity to show our appreciation. Of course, it needs to be within the compliance guidelines of companies, but typically a lunch is not outside the compliance guidelines for most companies I know. And it's an opportunity to learn more about the person and not just about the business. And if we have that opportunity, we should take it.
Yes.
That's a really good point, actually. And cultural variations do apply. And in some cultures, I guess it will be expected almost that happen, really. So, yeah, thank you for making that point, Christian, certainly. So back to the dangers of the corridor conversation. What traps can salespeople fall into then in the corridor conversation on the way?
I'm happy to take that off because I know I've fallen into it so many times, Steve. And and particularly when I first started selling, I was so excited. I loved the job and I was so keen and wanting to talk to customers with everything I knew. Of course, it all was wrong in that environment, that I was so excited the minute I met the customer that we'd be walking down the corridor or the long walk, to their office or the lab, and the conversation of the meeting would start. And then it was going quicker than I actually could think. And I hadn't got my prepared notes with me, and they're saying some really interesting things. I can't even make notes. And I just remember, it's really embarrassing, stopping at one moment and just saying, do you mind if I just get my notebook out? Middle of the corridor. And And it felt so strange. And it was really the wrong thing to do. I could have just said, but of course, in my naivety, just said, this is fantastic. I'm really looking forward to, are we meeting in your office to having this meeting, this conversation and discussing this further? That would have been a really gentle way of handling that. But we can get so in depth of the conversation that the meeting is almost done by the time we get to the, to the office.
We'll head back now then.
Yeah. And we haven't covered our objectives. We haven't actually understood, who we're speaking to, why, if there's other people involved. And we've started a conversation and maybe other people were going to be part of that meeting. And it can be a real interference and a really bad start to a great meeting that you'd got planned.
I think we've all done it, Jayne. Have you done something similar in the past, Christian?
Yeah, I think there's a danger of sticking with small talk, and that's actually a wasted opportunity. I mean, a little bit is maybe necessary depending on the cultural background, but don't stick with it for too long. The customer will be bored. You miss an opportunity to find out something important about the company, about the person, about their problems, challenges. So I think, talking about football has its place, particularly in Northern England.
Why Northern? What's wrong with the Midlands?
Absolutely. He's not a Villa fan, it's okay.
Clearly not a Villa fan,
I
Jayne.
just remember going to Middlesbrough and having a very enthusiastic Middlesbrough supporter as a customer there. But I think it's important to get back to business at some point, or at least vaguely towards business.
Yeah, we do. And so I think, just summarising what you both said, and I agree fundamentally with it, let's be a human being as we walk along the corridor. Let's listen to what the customer's saying in case they do give us any useful nuggets. But let's not get into trying to probe the customer, asking deep questions until we do sit down in front of the customer. And one of the things we talk about in our training, the training that you guys have both just delivered this week, in fact, actually in our foundational selling skills, is we have to adopt a meeting leadership mentality when we get in front of the customer. It's our job to take control of that meeting. We've asked for the meeting. It's our job to then take control of the meeting, ask the questions, probe for information. And we do have a process for doing that. But if you want to know more about that, dear listener, you're going to have to come on one of our training courses.
Absolutely.
So we've had a hopefully really productive meeting with the customer. We've found out all about their needs, things they'd like to do better. We've hopefully agreed a course of action for the next meeting, if there is one. Of course, we've got to go back to reception now. So are there any things we need to be mindful of on the way back to the reception from the lab?
I think it's a super opportunity to find out the stuff that's not said in the meeting. How is his relationship with the other stakeholders of the buying unit, perhaps? If there is some animosity or somebody who is blocking, there might be some kind of off-the-record information. Oh, Jack is not very keen, he's always worked with such and such. This is kind of information that you can get after the meeting, provided the person who walks you back to the reception is quite a friendly person towards your cause. It can also be a real sign of commitment if one of the bosses walks you back. Happened to me a year ago in a big company in Germany, and the vice president of that division walked me back to reception, and I think that was a super sign of respect as well, and an opportunity for me to kind of follow up and, maybe look forward. And so it's a real good opportunity. And it's also a great opportunity to make peace if the meeting was a bit controversial, or let's assume you negotiate it, and tough negotiation leaves everybody feel a bit slightly dissatisfied. At least, in my opinion, that's the goal of a negotiation. So that's the good middle ground.
Win-win, but also lose-lose.
So, and then the walk back is the opportunity to make amends as well, and to make sure that there are no bad feelings left from such a heated conversation.
Interesting. Yeah. Anything missing, Jayne, from that?
On the other side of that flip, I think, is don't undo the good work that you've done in the meeting by being a bit careless. Thinking, well, now I can relax. That was a little bit intense. Or, did that go according to plan? Don't start processing that in your head. Whatever you're processing, don't let that out of your mouth just yet. Get back to that point with the person in a really sort of good way, but, not processing out loud about how you feel or, good or bad. But it's a great extension. It's still a rapport moment, isn't it? How we are before and how we are afterwards is really, really important. Absolutely. How they meet us and how we say goodbye.
We're still, with a customer, we still need to be professional. We need to keep our standards up, particularly if we're just in a negotiation. We don't start walking off and say, well, we could have given you another 10% if you'd have asked us. That kind of letting our standards slip, really. And again, I've probably done it myself, and I've seen it happen in the field as well. And when we go back to reception, is it perhaps just, obviously shake hands, just reconfirming just, what we've said we would do, at the end of the meeting? Would that be appropriate as well?
Yeah.
You're both nodding.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a good end. Yeah, that's a good end of any meeting.
Yeah. Oh.
Reiterate what you agreed upon in the meeting room, perhaps, and then shake hands and say your farewells.
Totally. Yeah. Just to confirm once more, I'll send you an email to confirm this as well. But we'll see you again next Tuesday, a week on Tuesday, at 3:00 with my product specialist. We're going to do the demonstration. He's nodding and shaking.
Yes.
I'm not sure it's nodding, shaking his head, nodding, shaking your hand at the same time. Yeah. Anything else generally that we've missed then in terms of the corridor conversation? Any other final tips for anybody listening to this, particularly those of you listening who are new to sales?
I think for me, the whole thing is, particularly in the corridor, be super curious. Be open, have a look around.
Yeah.
We talked about picking up the culture right at the beginning from sitting in a reception, but walking down the corridors, you tend to see the awards that companies have got. You understand something of their compliance, but they've probably done some great things and had some great achievements. I think of some of the areas I used to sell in, some years ago, and they were doing incredible research, or they'd manufactured some incredible products. And of course, the people in the company are proud of what they've done. They're proud to work for them. And it's celebrating that and picking up, seeing what's down on the walls in the corridor. But also, you may walk past some of those now, glass walled labs, and you can see what's in there, And I think you are in the customer's territory. Just remember that. This is their world. This is where they work day in, day out, and respect.
Great point. So your spider sense need to be turned up to 11, mixing my metaphors there, so you can have a look in the lab as you walk by. And you make a great point as well about their products and their awards. So you and I have both recently done some training at Alderley Park, which used to be AstraZeneca's research. And as you go into there, all their blockbuster drugs are on the wall, aren't they?
Yeah.
Which is always interesting, always a conversation starting point.
Yes, absolutely.
Final tip from you, Christian?
Also, final thought for me, maybe if anybody's selling to academia, they typically have their academic posters on the wall, which they presented at some conferences or symposia. And so this is an excellent conversation starter to talk about their scientific achievements and their research and what's going on and what's happening. And then sometimes they stand there and explain the poster and their research to you, and you can see the pride in their face. And I mean, then
rightly so.
This really helps you to leave with a good impression.
Yeah, and come across as a real human being. Yeah, not some kind of sales bot, which none of us want to be, of course. Yeah, Christian, Jayne, thanks very much for that. Had some great thoughts there. So if you're listening to us, a dear listener, and you're planning to make a call, hopefully you're planning to make a call straight after this, listen to this podcast, just bear in mind the things we talked about in terms of that corridor conversation. Don't let your professionalism slip. Be super curious, be a real human being. Don't start selling at least until you get into the lab. And just remember that is quality time with the customer that you just might not get otherwise if you don't make the most of it. We'll be back again in a couple of weeks' time with another episode of The Luxury Choice. Just to say that we've been doing lots of exciting things here at George James Training. So we have launched a new brand. So if you go to our website, you'll see we've got a very new logo. We've got lots of new nice colors and all that kind of stuff, but lots of useful content, more importantly, on our website. And we've invested a lot of time and effort into what we call win selling. And win selling is the George James way of selling. There'll be lots more coming, both on the podcast, on LinkedIn Lives, on our website, basically anywhere we can tell people about what win selling is. But basically it's the way that we sell ourselves, but also, a methodology without being a framework. It's a concept for how people can sell and grow their business and continually keep growing their sales over the weeks and months ahead. But more of that to follow over the next few weeks. As I say, we'll be back again in a couple of weeks' time. If you have enjoyed this episode, don't forget to leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It does help us in lots of weird and wonderful ways. Have a great week out there. Happy selling, and we'll talk to you soon.